Hello, my name is Xander. Welcome back to the Django ORM Mastery series. You will find a link to all the tutorials in this playlist. There is a link in the video description. This is the third tutorial in this mini series where we're focusing in on the user model. What we have seen so far is that if your Django application has very basic requirements, the Django user model may already accommodate your needs. The approach demonstrated in this tutorial, or introduced in this tutorial, the general idea is that potentially you are looking to extend the user model and add some additional fields. The default Django model has 11 user fields. The idea here is that we want to add some additional fields. Now, we aren't going to do that by adding additional fields directly to the user table. We're going to create a new table. And we're going to call this the profile table. So the idea here is that potentially we want to store more additional information about the user, and we're going to create a new table. And that's going to be a one-to-one link over to the user table. So we're going to create a new table called profile. We'll add some additional fields here, and we'll create a one-to-one connection from the over to the user table. If you would like to master database interactions with Django, then please do consider looking or purchasing our Django 4x ORM Mastery course. It is currently the highest rated course for Django ORM. You'll find a link in the video description. That should always give you the best price for the course. Your table, your profile table, isn't limited just to 2 or 3 fields. Of course, you can add as many fields as you like, depending on the information that you want to store. But the idea here is that this information, this profile information, like email, like last name, like the first name field in the user model, the Django user model, these are all going to be optional fields. I make the assumption that the fields that we add in the profile table, these are fields that can be added potentially by the user once they have already registered, or once they register to your application or to your service. I have broken this tutorial down into separate steps so that you can choose how far or how deep you want to go into this tutorial. We will first start by creating the new models, hooking it up, looking at some of the different dynamics that we need to incorporate. So for example, if we are going to use a one-to-one table, then we ought to add an entry into that new profile table whenever we create a new user. So we need to learn how to handle that. And then we go into the admin site, look at how we can hook up this new model, this one-to-one table with the admin site. And then in addition to that, I'll show you how we can create a new profile form so that when the user is logged in, they can go ahead and update their new profile. We start this tutorial where we left off in the previous tutorial. So it's exactly the same code base. There is a link in the video description to this code base. So you can go ahead and download, start a new virtual environment, and then just run the requirements file here. And that would get you to this point here. There is a setup guide, I suppose, in the previous tutorial. So if you are completely new, it's well worth seeing the previous tutorial and going through that process and then moving back to this tutorial. So first of all, let's just go into the user models here, and I think we just remove or just highlight or comment out the existing code there, and we can go ahead now and create a new person model. Right, probably what we're going to need to do is just reset the database, so we'll just remove that database, and then in addition to that, don't forget to also remove the migration. Okay, right, so let's build a new model table, so class, and we'll call this user profile. So we're going to add some additional fields in our new user profile model. So model.model as per normal. And let's now create a new connection. So user equals. So here we're going to need to create a one-to-one field. And that's going to be over to the user model, the Django default user model. And then on delete will be models.cascade. So if we were to delete a user from the user table, then we would also delete the entry in the user profile table. So now we can just go ahead and add any of the other additional fields that you want to include. Here I'm just going to make up 2 fields, models.integer field. And then in addition to that, let's go for a nickname equals models.char field. and then max length. Let's just set this to 100. And what we need to consider now is that by default, don't forget that these fields are mandatory. So if we were to create a new user now, it would mean that we would also need to pass in this additional information about their age and nickname. So we need to be careful here and make sure that we set these fields so that they can be null or empty. So let's say null equals true, blank. So there are different rules here for different fields. So go ahead and have a look at the different field types. But I'm going to set null true, blank true to age. And let's just do the same for the character field. So null equals true, blank equals true. Okay, so I've just set here the fact that when we create a new user, when we actually attach a new user to the user profile, we don't need to necessarily also supply the age and nickname. That can be a blank field to begin with. And then it's the expectation that the user will then go into their profile and then add some additional information. If you do want to create new fields and you do want to make them mandatory, it's likely that you're going to want to take a different approach to this one here. This is really for situations where you don't want to make many changes to the user model, the existing user model, but you know that you might need a few additional fields. Maybe this approach might be appropriate, but there are additional approaches, and we will continue this tutorial series to have a look at those different options. So now we have our new table and fields in place. Let's go ahead and just so we can use this information in different places, let's add a string dunder method here. Oh, apologies, I don't know what's going on. My fingers today. Return, there we go again, return self.user. And then we return the username just to make it more usable so we understand what data it is we're working with. So we return the username of the particular user whenever we return objects. Right, so that's the default dunder string method. So let's go ahead now and actually migrate this. Now remember, we have deleted the database and migration, so Python 3 manage.py. Let's go ahead and make migrations. So you can see that we have a unexpected keyword blank. Yep, because I'm using capitals, apologies. Not entirely sure why I did that. So let's run that again. Migrations, there we go. So we're going to create a new user profile as well as set up all the default Django models. So let's go in and now migrate. So we migrate all the data. So we should have a new database now. So in comparison to the previous example where we created a proxy, we should now have an additional table. And that's our one-to-one table we just defined. So here we have our user profile. And you can see that we have the age, nickname, and in addition to that, the user ID. So now we've created a new table. We now need to actually add some data, of course. So let's take a look at the default behavior. Now, here I'm running SQLite extension. If you're wondering how I access the database, go over to the extensions, type in SQLite. That should take you to or present an extension here called SQLite. Go ahead and download that, and that just allows you to interact with your SQLite or SQLite databases. And you can see that I can access the data by right-clicking and showing the table here. Right, so let's go ahead and add some data. Yep, right, so we'll go ahead and type in Python 3 manage.py and then create super user. So even the super user, even the admin user, we want to potentially attach to some user profile data. So let's go ahead and add a new super user. So just admin, no email, password, whatever at this point. Okay, so I've added a new user. So if I go into the user table, show table, you can see I've added a new user here. This is the user we've just created. Now, ideally, what I want to happen is that whenever we create a new user, I want to attach them to a profile. I want there to be an entry ready for them to actually then attach or to add, any other additional information into their profile. At this minute, if I go into the user profile table and show the table, you can see that we don't currently have any information stored. So what we need to learn here is a little bit about signals. So Django includes a signal dispatcher, and this essentially allows us to be notified of when actions occur elsewhere within our application. So take example, what we've just done there in the previous task is that we created a new user. So Django will send out signals, or we can capture these signals to determine that has just happened on a particular model. In this case, the user model, we added a new user. And what we can do is we can capture a signal, either pre-save or post-save. Now, this is just one of the two of the signals that we can utilize. There are many others. For example, when we delete data or change the data, there are other signals to capture that information. But here we're going to utilize post-save signal. And that's going to give us a notification when, for example, we add a new user to the user table. So let's go ahead and start by using the receiver declarator here. And then we need to define what notification or when we want to be notified. So for example, here we want to be notified on post-save. So like I said, there's pre-save and post-save. So this is going to be utilized after a save has happened. So we're going to capture this information when a save has happened. And then we also need to then define the sender. So the sender is going to be the user, the user model. Yep. So here we're basically capturing a signal. When the user has saved new users into the database, we're going to capture a signal from Django, which is then going to help us determine that a new user has been saved, and we can now perform additional actions. Okay, so let's create a new function here. We're going to call this create user profile, because what we want to do is we want to now, whenever a new user has been created, to also now add them to the user profile table. Right, so by all means, go ahead and have a look at the Django documentation for the additional parameters and attributes for signals. But here we're just going to tap this out. So if created, okay, so if a user has been created, then we're going to perform some sort of action. So we're going to take the user profile table, we're going to use the default manager, and then we're going to use create. So we're going to create a new instance or new object and relate that to the user that has just been created. So what we can do here then is we can say user equals instance. So you can see here what's happening is we're passing in this instance. So whenever we have received a signal, the fact that the user has been created, we can gather that data, we can collect that data and pass it on over to our function here. And we can then utilize that information to then create a new entry in our user profile table. So we are going to need to bring in from Django.dispatch. Let's import receiver so we can capture that information. We are going to need a semicolon there. And then we just need to bring in the post save. So from Django.db. So this is to do with the databases, models.signals. Let's import post save. Okay, there we go. So just to recap, whenever we now save a user in the user table, Django is going to send out a signal, and we're now going to be notified of this signal. We're going to receive this signal, and then we're going to go ahead and check to see if a user has been created, and then we use the instance, the user that has been created, we use that data to then populate the user profile table. So let's try this again. We'll go ahead and let's just delete the databases again. We'll start from fresh and we'll use our previous command. So make migrations. We'll then go ahead and migrate, and then we'll go ahead and create a new super user. So I'm just pressing up and down on the keyboard here, bringing up the previous commands. So create a new super user, admin, yes. And now let's take a look at our new database. Open up the database. We should now see inside the user profile here, if we inspect the table, we should now see a new user. So now we have a way of actually populating this table whenever we create a new user. Let's now think about actually allowing them to maybe update that information. So as I mentioned at the start of this tutorial, I was going to just quickly show you how to potentially add a method of updating this data, for example, in the Django admin, and how you might create a simple form to capture this information when a user logs in. So maybe there's a new page that you create in your application called user profile. They click on that link and that takes them to a page and they can then update their user information. So apologies, I didn't give you much information here. So you can skip this little section. Let me just break this down a little bit more. I feel as though I need to just iterate over this again. I tried to just tell you in layman terms enough information for you to be able to replicate this for additional models that you might want to create. But here essentially what we have is post save. And I will leave a link in the video description to the documentation. So the post save signal sends a number of different arguments. So here we have the sender, which is the model class. So that's the sender of this signal from the user table. So we're going to capture post saves, if you like, signals from the user table. So here we have a few different options here. So we have sender, for example. So the sender here is the model class. Okay, so that's the class model. If we want to utilize that, we have the instance, and that's the actual instance that was being saved. So we can grab that instance, and you can see what we're doing here when we create a new entry in our table, in our new model, that we're using that instance to help populate our table and make the connection. Because all we need to do here, if you're not familiar to one-to-one, is we just need to specify the ID of the new user from the user model. So when we create a new user in the user model, that's going to be provided a primary key, an ID. And all we're doing is we're just matching that, saving that here, so we can connect this record that we're building in the user profile over to the user model. Okay, so we also have created. This is just a Boolean field, if I remember. True, return true if the actual record was created, and false if it wasn't. So here you can see if created. So if this record wasn't created, if the user wasn't saved correctly, then this is going to be false. So we don't then go ahead and update our new table. So this will return true or false depending on whether the user was successfully added to the user table. So in order to set up our admin, what we're going to need to do is go into our admin here. We're going to need to potentially use an inline. So if you haven't used an inline before, now if you remember when we go into if you've used the Django site before, typically when we use the Django admin site, it will present to us an interface, a form, which represents data that we can save in an individual model. Now here, in this case, we have two models. So we're going to use an inline and basically just stack up the forms so that when we enter the user form, at the bottom we can now utilize the profile form. So whenever we save the user form, it will also update and save the data in the profile form. So let's give this a go. So from user.models, let's import the user profile. So we're going to need that table. We're going to need to use a table as well. So let's just bring that in. So Django.contrib.auth.models. This is obviously just one way of accessing the auth models. Let's import the user. And then in addition to that, let's go ahead and import the auth user admin. So we are going to unregister the old admin and then register our new admin, so update it with the new settings that we define. So let's go from Django.contrib.auth.admin. Inside here, we're going to import the user admin. Let's import the user admin as auth user admin. Okay, right, so let's go ahead and create a new class. So class user profile inline. So we're going to create a new inline. And basically what we're doing here is we're setting up this inline, which is basically capturing all the information about our user profile table. And then we can then utilize that and then add it, if you like, to the normal user admin form. So let's go for this user admin inline. So there's a few different options here. I'm going to use the stacked inline for no particular reason, really. So model equals user profile. So that's the model. Can delete. So we can set different options. For example, can delete equals false. So let's not allow them to maybe delete data, for example. Let's remove that option. Okay, there we go. So now we have our inline. Let's go ahead and just have a look at the default options to begin with. So we have already created a new admin user. So what we need to do at this point is run our service, run server. Let's just take a look over here. So just go into the admin. It should just be admin. That's what we just created earlier. So let's go into users. This is the default user setting. If you go into admin here, you can see at the moment, all I have access to is the normal fields, additional fields about personal information, first name, last name, email. So no other additionalities. So let's go ahead now and actually attach our form here. So it appears at the bottom here. So we can add that additional profile information here in the admin site. So first of all, let's create a new class. I call this accounts user admin, auth user admin. Okay. And then we'll set up some inlines equals, and that's going to be the user profile inline. So you can see here we've set up this form, if you like, and we're now going to attach it to the accounts user admin. And that's essentially what we're referring to here, this page here. Okay, right, so we now have that in place. So what we want to do at this point is we just want to, let's just try that, see what happens. Okay, so we refresh here, and you can see nothing happens at this point. Okay, so what we need to do is, in order to get this working, is that we need to say admin site dot unregister. So we need to unregister user, and now we want to apply our customization. So we say admin dot site dot and then register. So we're now going to register our user and then accounts admin user. Okay, so now we have that back in place. Let's go for a refresh, and you can now see at the bottom here we have the user profile information from our user profile table. All good. Right, so let's go ahead and add some data. Press save. Let's take a look, see if that has saved. Looks like it has saved. Let's go into the our table here. Let's open up the database, have a look at our data, and you can see that our new data has been saved. So here's the problem with this approach. If I go back into my user here and I add a new user, notice that the user profile information is also being attached to adding a user. So let's just go for test. I just create a new user, and we can see the error that occurs here. So let's add in some information, press save, and you can see we get this integrity error, unique constraint failed, user profile, user ID. So it causes an error by default, and although we could probably overcome this and actually have this attached to our data, that isn't the approach that we're trying to create here. And that's something that we're doing in a later tutorial, where we add additional information potentially when we add in new users. So this isn't something that we desire. So how can we get rid of this? Well, we can kind of go back a step here and think about, well, these are different views. This view here is different from, for example, the add user view. This is a different form completely, a different area, a different piece of code. So we can separate that, or we can override this behavior utilizing the add view, overriding the add view and the change view. Remember, this is the add view right here. I say remember this. This is the add view if you're not familiar with this. And then this is going to be the change view. So we can override these views, and so that the profile data will appear down here, as well as allowing the user to type in or update, but we can then remove it from the add view. So let's go ahead and do that. So back in our code here, let's make a few different changes. I'll just drop that down. So what we're going to need to do here then is just expand the accounts user admin. Let's just define, first of all, the add view. So we're taking self and maybe any kind of args and quarks. Okay, right, so self.inline. So we're going to set the inline for the add view inline, and that's going to equal nothing. So what we want to do here is when we go to the add view, we want to make sure that there are no inlines. So we just need to override and return. So return super user admin self and then dot add view args quarks. Okay, so what we've done here then is we've simply just override the existing behavior. We've removed any inlines, and then we've basically just returned that back, and it now should show as per normal. Right, just wondering what the problem is here. So user admin is not defined. Okay, so I've named it accounts user admin, that's why. Accounts user admin, that makes sense. And then I need an S there, and there we go. Right, so that works out nicely there. So let's go ahead now and just try this out. So if I refresh, you can now see that form has now been removed from this view. So we do want to now add it to the other view, the change view. So let's just create a new function here. Now I'm just going to copy and paste this. And this is going to be the change view. Here we are going to define our inline. And in addition to that, let's go ahead and just make sure that we define our accounts user admin. Yep, that's in place. Yeah, there we go. I think that's pretty much all we need to do there. So let's go back in. Let's go to our users, go to our admin. Okay, unexpected keyword object ID. Okay, so I noticed that we're going to need a plural inlines. So make sure that's in place. Hopefully that will fix it. No. Okay. Okay, I've not changed this yet. So it's the change view. Apologies. Right, so change view, refresh, go down to the bottom. It's still there. Should work okay. Yep. There we go. So when we add a new user, you can see it's been removed. And then we go into the admin here, the change view. You can see it's now available. So I do apologize if you wanted some more information, and I'm trying to build a clear division here between what I'm trying to show in this tutorial, which is really predominantly the tables and how to build the tables related to the ORM, rather than templating and styling, etc. So there's obviously a lot of information here that potentially you have lots of questions. What are args and quarks? Maybe there is a tutorial on that to help you get started here. Add view, change view, what else is available, and so on. But hopefully you can get the general flow of what is happening here. And that's really the principle here. The rest of this information we can learn from additional tutorials or potentially the Django documentation. So now we have the admin in place. Let me just take you through the process of building a form. So we're going to make the assumption that the user needs to be logged in. And when they are logged in, they can access a new page called profile, for example. So we're going to build a new template, a profile template. We go ahead and build a form, and we showcase how we can then present that form so that the user can update their profile on the web page as long as they're logged in. Let's sort out the URLs first. So we're going to pass a set of URLs, or we're going to create a new set of URLs, sorry, in the user space. So let's go path. Let's set up a new path, So we go include, and then we want to include the user URLs. So we're going to create a new file in a second, URLs, and then we're going to give a namespace, provide a namespace, and that's going to help us easily access maybe some URLs if we want to, for example, redirect the user. So we've got the namespace user here, and now we've got that in place. Let's go ahead and go into the user app here. Let's create a new file, urls.py, and we're going to now set up this somehow. Okay, so we're going to need a Django. Oh, we're going to need a from Django dot URLs, and we're going to import path, and then I'll just zoom in a bit. And then we're also going to need to have a from dot, let's import views. Okay, so we're going to give this an app name. We have got a namespace. So this is going to be set to the namespace name, user, that we defined in the previous URLs. So URL patterns, let's set out our patterns here. We're going to have a path, a new path. So we're going to set out a new profile page. That's what we're going to be building, and that's going to be connected to a new view. So views.update profile. So we're going to make a new view called update profile. I've got product on my mind. And then we're going to give this a name so we can access this maybe for reverse or redirect URL profile. There we go. So there we have our new URL. Right, so next up, we need to attach this to our view. So let's now go into the views. We are going to be building a view called update profile. So we'll go ahead and do that. So update profile, we're taking the request. So here we're going to be working with two forms. Remember, we're going to need a form to collect and validate data in the user table. And then we're also going to need to collect and validate that data in the user profile. So here we're going to be utilizing two forms. So let's first of all just build the forms. Now we could create a form file for this, but I'm just going to do it right here. So user form, we're going to get forms.model form. And here we're going to set our class meta. So we're going to define the model. The model is going to be, in this case, the user model, and then the fields that we want to use. So let's define our first name, lowercase. So these are the fields that we want to show to the user so that they can fill in our form. Last name. Okay, so that's the first form. Let's now create our second form. We're going to put these forms together. So it's going to look seamless. So there isn't two forms shown to the user as such. It will look like just one form. So we've got the user form. So again, forms.model form. And same process. So grab our meta, the model. That's going to be the user profile. And then we need the fields. That's going to be the age. And the second one was nickname. Okay, so we've now defined our two forms. Let's just go ahead and add in. So I've got we'll just do this anyway. Okay, so I thought we was going to be able to do that automatically. From Django, import forms. So let's bring in forms. What else are we going to need here? We're going to need some tables, some models. So let's do that from .models. Let's go ahead and import the user profile. And then in addition to that, we are going to need the user. So from Django.contrib .auth.models. Let's import user. Thank you. Right. So now we have that in place. Let's go ahead now and focus in on our view. Now, we do want to make sure that the user has logged in. So we don't want them to access the user profile, of course, unless they're logged in. So a few different ways to do this, but we're going to use the login required declarator. Here we're using functions. function-based views. And in addition to that, we want to make sure that whenever we save the form related to the user in the user table, if we update that, we also need to make sure that the user profile form was also updated. What we don't want to do is get into a situation where one form is updating correctly and one form isn't. So this is a good example potentially where we can use transaction atomic. If you're not familiar with transaction atomic, then there are videos on this channel which will help you out there. But essentially this will allow us, or it will ensure that if there's any problems at all saving to the two models, if one model has a problem, then the other model won't get saved. So this ensures that both forms successfully save to the database in order to actually apply that data to the database. So data won't get saved to the database if one of the forms fails. So we're going to use transaction atomic there. So we're going to need to bring all this into our project here. So from the Django DB, we're going to import transaction. And then for the login required from Django.contrib auth as the decorators, and let's import the login required. Yeah. Okay. Always press that wrong button on the keyboard. Right. So that's what we've got up here then in the imports. So let's go back down now and finish this off. Right. So the first thing that we need to do is check to see if, for example, the request. So that's the user request. So has the user gone to that page, or has the user actually pressed the button to submit data? That's what we're trying to capture here. So we'll check to see if the request method equals post or not. So if the user has gone to our update profile page by just navigating the link, then the request method will not be post. It would just be get. If, for example, the user has accessed our profile page via the button, so if they have filled in some profile data and pressed the button, they would have posted some data. So therefore, the request method will be post. Right, so let's capture that. So if they do post some data, we're going to do something. Right, and that's where we're going to save the data. If they don't post, if they just navigate to our page, we want to sort out something. So we're going to create let's set up the user form. So the user form is going to be user form. That's our user form. Let's just grab an instance of that. And what instance do we need? Well, we need to show information related to that particular user. So we can grab the user information from the request if the user is logged in. Let me just move this across. So what we've done here is we've essentially just populated the user form. Yep, the user form. We populated the user form. I wonder why that's weird. I spelled that incorrectly, haven't I? Based upon the user that's logged in. That's what we've done there, essentially. So let's do the same thing for the user profile. So user profile form. Let's say the user profile form. And then we want to populate that. So instance equals request.user. So get the user request information. And then we need the user profile data. So it's going to be user, if you can just spell user profile. So that's how we're going to grab the user profile information based upon the current user that's utilizing or accessing their user profile. Right, so now we have that in place. Let's go ahead and just test this out by returning our render. And what we need to do is pass back our request. We're going to need to make a template. So we'll call this profile.html. And then we're going to need to pass back some data to our template. So let's go for user form. That's going to be the user form data. Let's go for p form. That's going to be the user profile form. Okay, so we pass this data back. to our template so we can utilize it and create our form and show the current user's data. I'm going to stop doing that. Right, so that's the final code right there for that. So now we can go ahead and test this out. But before we do that, of course, we are going to need a template. So I'll just remove that. So let's build a new template in the user application here. Let's create a new template folder. And we're going to need to create a new file called profile.html. Cool. So let's just grab a template. So let's go to Bootstrap here. Let's go to documentation. Let's just grab a default Bootstrap setup. This second option here, I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste that right here. I don't need that. Well, let's just check to make sure this works to begin with, actually. So that is now in place. So we now have a URL, we now have a view, we now have a template. So the question is, will this actually work? So let's, no module name user.urls. So that already looks like a problem that we have. URLs is named correctly. So we'll sort that out in a second. Let's just try this again. Okay, so let's go back into our application. 8,000. Okay, so it looks like we have a profile link ready. Profile. There we go. So template does not exist. So at the moment, we can't find the template. So profile.html. So I've named it correctly. It is in a template folder, but if I just rename that to templates, that's probably going to be more effective. So Django is looking for the default name of templates. So that was my fault. So if I refresh now, we can see that we still have an error. So profile.html, just double checking the name, looks absolutely fine. So let's just stop and restart the server and go for a refresh. And it looks like it now works. So our template is now working, which is great. So now we can go ahead and edit our template to add our new form. Right, so I'll just bring this down a little bit so we can see what we're doing. So let's go ahead and build our new form. So for this, we're going to create a new set of, a new block, a new set of divs. I don't have this set up automatically on mine, so div, and then here we're using Bootstrap, so class equals container, and then we're going to create some padding at the top, maybe 5, and then we just need to place this, we need to put this, we don't need to, but we're going to put this kind of center on the page. So a new block here, so class equals, we're going to use deflex. I'm just going to put this in the middle basically. So I'm just going to just define content center. And then I can go ahead and put my form in place. Right. Okay. Okay, so my form, that is going to be method. So when I send, the method I send is going to be post, for example. We're going to need to make sure that we've got our CS RF token in place. And we are going to then need to utilize uform. Remember, this is the context reference, uform as P. So we're going to serve the form as P's, God, can't think of the word. The form inputs. Ooh. Okay, so P underscore form dot as P. Right, so we are going to need a button as well. So let's create a new button. Type equals, let's go for submit. And then class, this is just all Bootstrap stuff. BNT primary, B for styling. So it's going to be a nice blue color. And then we're going to have a name in the middle of the button. We've just finished off the button. Okay, so that's our button in place. So hopefully when we go back and refresh, we can now see this. So that wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I just noticed a typo here, deflex. So I'll refresh again, and there we go. So that's what I was looking for. So you can see here, I am logged in as the admin, and the admin, we have actually added some data. So you can see that we've added this data here. So let's just change our nickname to ads and then age 22. And we'll go ahead and just change the information here as well in the default. So this is the admin, last name admin, and so on. So we'll save that. And you can see what's happening in our form. If I refresh, we're just picking up the information that's currently being stored. So let's go ahead and change this to something else. So age 23, for example, then admin, call this admin1, press submit. And you can see here at the moment, we haven't set up this, this feature, but we are now going to need to set up the feature so we can actually store information back into the database. So let's go ahead and do that now. Right, so we have everything in place in terms of presenting the default form to the user with our else here. Now, obviously, what we've done there is we pressed the button, we sent a post request, and we passed. So now what we need to do is fill this in and actually save that data to the database. So let's populate the data to begin with. So I'm going to copy this up to the top here. So this is how we populated the form previously. So this time what we want to do is we want to get the data from the post. So user form, we're going to say request.post and then get the instance. So essentially what we're doing here, we're storing the data that the user has saved to the new form, what they've actually typed in. So we now have that new data. So all we need to do now, of course, is to store it, right? So let's move this into here, just to line this up. So the first thing we do is we check to see if the user has actually pressed the button and sent a post request. We then grab that information and ready it so that we can store it in the databases. Right, so next up then, we will need to check or just validate the data. So user form we use is valid. So we're just going to check the data, the user form data, and also the user profile form data. So we're going to check to see if that is valid. Okay, so if we're happy with that, we can then go ahead and say user form dot save, and then we can go ahead and also the user profile form dot save. Okay, so now we've saved the data, we've checked the data, and now we've gone ahead and validated the data, and we've gone ahead and saved it. Let's now just return the user back. So we say return redirect, and then what we're going to do here is use the context. So user, and then we're going to use profile. You saw earlier we created a URL structure where we set out the namespace, and then we gave the app name, and then also we then named the URL. So what we're doing here is we're just grabbing that URL via the namespace and name of the URL, and then we can then return that URL and return the user to that URL. So that's the redirect. So let's go in and Django shortcuts. I don't think I've added, I must have a render, yeah. So let's do that. So render and redirect. Okay, so that's the redirect sorted. So what we could also do here, of course, is you could capture any errors. So you could have an else here and capture any errors. I'm not going to put that here in this code, but that is something to think about. So if the user has pressed the button, we grab the data, and then we save it to a database. We're using transaction atomic, so both tables need to be saved correctly before we commit to the database. And then we return the user. If the user hasn't pressed the button and just navigated to the page, we show them their current data and then return that data to the form. So let's give this a go. Let's go back. Let's just submit again. And you can see this time I've submitted. Doesn't look like there's a problem. So let's go back into the admin, and you can see now that has been changed. and then that has also been changed. So we clearly now have a form that when users log in, the data will then be populated here based upon the current user that's logged in. And this form will now allow them to save data in the two forms, the one-to-one table that we created and the existing user model. Thank you very much for listening. There will be more tutorials. We will look at furthering our knowledge of the user model, moving into creating now more bespoke and customized user models. Don't forget to check out us on all the socials, follow us and so on. And if you are thinking about learning more about the Django ORM, then please consider purchasing our course on the Django ORM. There is a link in the video description. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.